I thought I'd start with asking everyone to give a brief summary of how you got to this seat, and maybe one or two milestones that were, really influential in getting you to the marketing leadership role.
I start?
Sure.
Cool. I moved, so I'm French, as you would guess from my accent. If I get excited, I speak super fast, so you're not going to understand what I say, so I try to go slow. The big thing, I moved here 10 years ago, and one of the first thing I did, so I was initially in marketing, then in sales for some time, and moved back to marketing and demand gen. And when my company got acquired, after a couple of months, went to see the VP of sales, VP of marketing as a CEO, saying, hey, I'd love to do an investment in a marketing automation platform. It was 10 years ago. And I'm like, it's going to cost $150,000 a year. And they're like, you're not serious, right? I'm like, no, I am. Like, we should really, sorry, it was Alacqua. I do apologize. It was not Marketo at that time. Marketo was not there. And they say, yes, that's funny. I'm like, no, it's not. And actually, we have 20 sales quota carrying rep. And if you multiply average deal size 20K, you get to 400K in revenue if I'm able to drive at least one deal through that platform. And quickly doing the math, I try to explain to them that first it will be a productivity investment, and the second one is that I will be willing to measure revenue and to have a quota, even if I didn't have a bonus. And this is how I really started into demand marketing, investing into technology and measuring that investment.
Wow, it's incredible.
And it worked.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Having fun at Twilio.
Yeah.
That's good stuff. So I've had a long and storied history in the tech world. I actually started in engineering in quality assurance, so that was a fun ride, and then went into product management and product marketing. Ran an executive briefing center, which was was exciting, working with customers. But I'll fast forward to success factors. So one of the things that happens in the tech world is people leave. They move to new roles. And I had come from Cisco to SuccessFactors to lead America's field marketing. And sure enough, quickly became global field marketing. And then some people left, and then it kind of became running almost everything except for solution marketing. So my experience has been one of, I'll have to say right place, right time. But I would say also it's important that you are creating strong relationships with leadership, not only those that are in your local office, but across the globe. Because sometimes it's just, hey, we have somebody that understands the business, and we need you to step in, and we'll figure out what's going to go on, and maybe you'll be that person, maybe you won't, but it's your time to step up. And in the case of SuccessFactors, that was the situation, and built some good relationships with not only the leadership there, but we were also going through the integration with SAP, so building strong relationships with those people, as well as Lars Dalgaard, who's now at A16Z. So it's I think being there and just and standing up and having your team stand up, and I have just the best team ever.
Makes sense. Thank you.
How did I get here? Lots of bribes, lots of therapy.
The truth comes out.
At least the first things that come to mind. I've been around a long time too, back when the Silicon Valley was actually the valley that's south on 101 down there. But early on, my first full-time job, at least in the tech industry, was actually in customer service at Hotmail, the free email company. I'm dating myself clearly now, clearly. Took a customer service job there, just a straight up, I'm going to answer questions about people's free email. And literally 2 weeks into the job, the VP that the department rolled up to me, came to me and said, JD, I think you should manage this team. Would you like to? And I said, sure. And basically I've been managing people ever since. Thinking back to maybe like what he saw or what I did to start a management track, I think it was sort of being very execution focused but team oriented at the same time. And I think like even quite simply down to an actual tactic, I asked lots of questions. I think I was always a very curious person and always trying to think about and asking a lot of questions about how we could do better as a team and how we could scale this thing and that sort of stuff. So anyway, bounced around many years after that and worked my way out of customer service into product management is where I spent the bulk of my career. and then eventually kind of moved into marketing and some more of the business side functions. But that was kind of the start, and yeah, lots of lessons and things along the way that I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, it's a lot of richness in just these three answers, which we could spend a whole, other day on. But the idea that you have to advocate for what you believe in, the idea that you have to build relationships with not only the marketers, but the folks around you, because marketing is a fairly, in the core of the company role, you have to interface with all the departments, and being open to new experiences, and as well as, learning how to manage along the way, are all things that marketers have to deal with, plus learning the functions, learning all of the different parts of marketing. So I think that's it's really richness of experience that brings you to the seat, right?
Yeah.
So along lines with that, I think it might be interesting to talk about a weakness, something that you had to overcome along the way, that looking back you find, well, that was key for me to take on and really conquer.
I'll jump into this one. Sure. One that I still have to some extent and always dealing with, and I didn't even know this was like a thing until recently, but are you familiar with imposter syndrome? Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big deal, right? And that's basically the idea of that feeling of like, I don't deserve this. They're going to catch on to me at some point. Like, there's no way I deserve to be CMO. Like, they're going to figure this out. It's sort of like having those types of feelings. So I think that was like a big thing. I think that was a big thing to get through, especially as I was kind of making my way up closer to the exec ranks and getting there, is ultimately questioning whether I deserved it and whether it was the right thing, if that was the right place for me to be. Yeah, so, and I think, getting through that, I don't know if there's even really a magic bullet necessarily. I think some is just recognition that that's a thing and that you're not alone in having those feelings. It's actually a very common thing. And I think, ultimately working with mentors and other folks that I became close to in my job sort of helped me through that and helped me see those things. But yeah, that's a big one for me that came to mind.
Great. Julie?
Yeah, for me it was letting go a little bit. Because I had been very focused on the role or the roles that I had. It's like, okay, well, we've got to do this really well, and we've got to build plans, and we have to execute, and we have to build those strong relationships with the sales leaders. I'm now going to need to step back, and is that an okay thing to do, and is the team ready? But more importantly, am I ready to take that step back? There was a little bit of the control freak.
Yeah.
If I can control it, then I can measure it, I can manage it, and if we, a ball gets dropped, I can kind of pick it up again or help the team. And I had to realize that there was just going to be some mistakes and some gotchas along the way, but that we're going to figure it out. And we had some gotchas along the way, but it really worked out. And people stepped in and stepped up. And that was the great thing, is watching not only kind of senior members on the leadership team, but even younger members of staff just, raise their hand. It's like, I'm here, I'm ready to go. And that was really exciting. But as a leader, just realizing, you're not gonna control everything, and you kind of got to let it go.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
Nicolas?
I have two. The first one was a long time ago. I was not listening at all. More or less, I was coming with my plan, ready to roll and just to go and do it. And especially at that time, all those marketing automation world was pretty new. And the time to explain and listen to this is not going to work, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it, and we're going to move along. Every time I've been in hyper-growth startups, so it was just move fast. And tied to the not listening, improving on the listening was better communication. Today, all of you have superpowers with the technology you use, the data you leverage, and what you do on a daily basis. And many people fail at communicating effectively on their superpower, talking about themselves and doing a poor job marketing themselves within the company, being at exec level, being at peers level, explaining the why, the what, and the how of what you're doing.
Great. One follow-on question, and I'll give this one to Julie, and feel free to chime in. Having recognized, what you struggled with, is there something that you see your teams doing that you would love for them to ask help or raise their hand, or something you wish they would do to say, hey, I can give you a helping hand, or I can help you learn more along the way?
Yeah. What I see teams do, and especially ones that are high performers, individuals that are high performers, is that they get very focused on what they're doing. And there is that bit of managing up, communicating, which you touched on. and explaining what you're doing, sharing, getting people involved, and that's something that often doesn't happen. And it's, and I would say, I would wish that they would raise their hand and say, hey, can you help me message out what my team is working on, whether it's a program, whether it's a new campaign, whether it's a major event. But getting the rest of the organization aware, involved, and engaged, and passionate about what you are doing is good both for what you're doing, but also for growth of your younger talent. And that's something that they often don't do, because they see a sense of hubris, a sense of I'm bragging, and the fact is, no, you're not. You're sharing something that's an important initiative for the company, and that's one area that I try to do with the teams. And it's like, hey, are you messaging enough? And messaging is important.
And helping their other team members learn from what they're doing.
That's right.
Because we can also be really siloed into our specific task and not have the advantage of learning from our peers right around us.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Anything to add?
I would just say making sure to include the why in that. Like I totally agree. It's super important. Not only if you're knocking stuff out and you're really nailing your area, that's not enough. You sort of have to let other people know that you're doing that, but also the why behind it, I think, is really important.
That's right.
It's one thing to have the person that's, you might know, well, that's that person doing events, and I guess the events are cool, but like you really want them to understand, why you're doing those things. And I think people, the more they can understand, how that stuff ties to company goals or to what you're all trying to achieve as a group, you're going to get more buy-in and be more successful.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I will add, when you have meetings and you're running that meeting, be ready for it. Like, don't come and say, this is what we're going to talk about. Like, be really ready for it, prep. And the more senior people you're going to engage with, the more prep you have to be and the more you need to have an agenda. Many people, and happening on my team, like get the opportunity to meet like with VP, and it's not about like the title and everything, but meet with pretty senior people they're going to see once a month. Was more or less like that meeting is going to be what that person think about the person she met with, more or less, for the next 3 months. And but the point is, there is so much to learn and so much to get from it. And many junior people on your team, if you're leading a team, or of your peers, just don't prep. They go there and they're like, what are we going to talk about? And they don't use that full half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, having the opportunity either to exchange, to get feedback, or to learn something from that discussion. And so every time I have people in my team meeting with pretty senior exec in the organization, I'm like, first you prep, and second I do a follow-up saying, okay, have you achieved your goals? And what were your goals? And what did you get there? It's not about manipulation. It's just being able to make the best use of that time. You're all working in startup. Nobody has time. Everybody's running around. So prep.
But by the way, I would tack onto that too, even if it's not your meeting and you're not the leader of it, still prep, right? For a meeting you're going to go to. What am I going to get out of this? What are the questions I want to learn? Like, what am I hoping to get out of this? Like, and do any background prep. I think it's important. Actually, ex-CFO at Zendesk used to have an expression I really liked, is that we don't want tourists in our meetings, right? Like, if you're just going there just to play tourist and just sort of hear and see and not be actively engaged, don't go to the meeting. Right, and I think going back to my earlier point of early in my career, speaking up, asking a lot of questions, I think meetings are a great place to do that. And the more prepared you are, whether it's your meeting or someone else's, you're going to be more successful.
You could have a whole panel on meetings alone.
Totally.
Yes, and there are, I bet, actually happening right now.
Yeah.
There was a question I'm going to bubble up because it got mentioned around managing up. And you mentioned the word manipulation, which I laugh about in my head because in my own experience, managing up or down, you were either really good at managing up or really good at managing down, and you didn't have the other skill set. So I'd love to hear from this panel around how you've learned to balance the two, or if you haven't, how do you manage around it?
Yeah, managing up.
How do you manage
we're
managing?
Clearly still figuring that one out.
How do you
Let's be
manage?
clear.
So first, another thing is, are you clear with yourself about what is your job? It doesn't come from me, it comes from Fred Kaufman. If you can summarize in like 15 words, 1-5, what your job is, will be a good first step. The second step is being able to have agreement with your boss, your peers, or whoever in the organization that this is your job. And when I joined Twilio a year ago, it took me 2 months to get to that agreement, okay? And I was like laser focused on it, because you're like, why do you care? You just work and do stuff and you'll get there. It's because I know that my boss or my peer will be frustrated. Like I will go on the right-hand side thinking this is my job, and they're like, what is the guy doing? You will come back and show, this is success, I nailed it. And they're like, no, that's not what I was expecting from you. This is really, really important, and think about it. Like in 15 words, what is your job? And are your peers, your boss, your business partner aware of it? The second one is, I can go crazy, so I'll go short. Can you map within the organization 5 people for you personally to be successful within the organization you work at? If it's smaller, you go down to 3. Another 5 people for your team to be successful, and 5 people not within the organization you belong to for you to grow in your job. Okay. And then the managing up, sorry, is still relevant, but it's like when you have clarity on what you do, what's your job, when you have clarity on who you're going to work with, and everybody is in the same at the same spot, I think you have it. And it's not about calculation of managing up. It's just running with your passion and what you like, and just go and do it.
I think for me, I learned when we were going through the acquisition of SuccessFactors into SAP, and SuccessFactors was one of the first of the cloud companies to get formally rolled into the marketing organization. And at that time, Jonathan Becker was the chief marketing officer at SAP. And what he taught me, and he continues to teach me, is go for the ask. Whether it's in a QBR, whether it's in a meeting, or just a casual coffee. What's your ask? What do you need? How can that person help? So instead of just simply reporting the news, here's what my team's doing, here's what I'm doing, here's all the greatness that's going on, or here's all the crap that's going on, how can this person be bought in and help you and your team be more successful? And so as part of his QBRs, there was always the slide at the end, which was the issue and the ask. And it's something that I've tried to impress upon my team through their own QBRs or just through our general meetings, which is, what's the ask? Where do you need help? How can you make the team more successful? How is you as a leader of an organization, how can you be more successful? And for me, as a marketing leader, I think that's an important thing, is when do you need help and how do you articulate that?
Yeah, I think those are great answers. I totally agree. I think some of it too is just a human thing at the end of the day, right? The same thing as managing down and up. I think the key is listening and really understanding what is the motivations that person carries, and the more you can really listen to them, you can understand what motivates them, you're going to be able to better figure out how to both what to tell them and sort of how to package that. I think the other thing, just a more tactical thing to do, is just truly understand your boss's goals or whoever you're managing up to, and make sure and figure out what's that mapping and how that translates to your goals. First of all, that's just a good thing to do, because I've definitely been in a place where, wait a minute, my goals have nothing to do with my boss's goals. I should probably be leaving the company, or figuring out my exit, because it's not looking good, right? I mean, so first of all, that's a sanity check to make sure the stuff you're working on is ultimately in line with what your boss's goals are and what they care about. But then also that's just going to help you understand what sort of information to feed them, what sort of things to give them, so you can focus really on what matters. Great piece of advice I got from a mentor very early in my career is, your best path to success is make your boss happy, right? And so really understanding what is that trigger that's ultimately going to make them happy, and capitalizing on that. It's a good thing to tell your employees, by the way, too. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. That's actually, again, like managing up and managing your team is a really tough area. And for some, it takes years and years to get even halfway good at it. And some of us are thrown into the role as well. So it's always important to be learning and understanding how to do it better. Because ultimately, it is our teams that make us successful. I'm going to jump back to sort of the earlier parts of the careers. I know some folks are earlier on in the demand gen world. I think it would be interesting to talk about how are some ways for early demand gen marketers to measure themselves in an area where they're being said, test this, try this, and maybe their programs are failing or they're not as successful as they're hoping to be. How do they measure success for themselves?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because today we live in a world where we have art and science, and we need to deliver our numbers, and on top of it we need to do experiment. Being able to carve out time and being able to clarify what I'm going to test and getting acceptance on the fact that you're going to fail. Somebody touched on it recently on an earlier panel or discussion or presentation. Don't be afraid to miss. It's okay. It's not bad. And it goes back to communication as well. But being able just to focus on your work and carve out some time, let's say 20% or whatever it takes, half a day, to be able to run those experiments, and being sure that when you start, you define a goal or a target. Most of the time, people run the experiment, and after they're like, oh, what should I have measured? So you already always want to measure or define ahead of time what you're going to do. So being able to, long story short, two things. One is carve out some time for the specific experiment and even budget. Communicate to be sure you get the approval in case you're stressed out, but most of the time I hope your manager will support it. The second one is define success metrics ahead of time, and even if you have no clue, try to guess something and you'll get better at it and report back, I would say, and go and do it. And if your boss doesn't like it, change boss.
Oh, there you go. Wow.
JD, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think I would say one thing to do is when you're setting up something you're going to measure, something you're going to report on, a metric you're driving towards is, well, ultimately, I mean, it's got to tie to the big picture. It's got to tie to what matters. And I think one way to kind of keep yourself focused on that is ask yourself 5 whys. And if you don't get to the overall company goal within 5 whys, you're probably on a bad path. Meaning, let's say you're going to A/B test, a landing page conversion or whatever, and you're going to get your metric of, which version people are clicking the button more. Well, why does that matter? Well, because we need more signups. Well, why does that matter, right? And dig your way down to hopefully hit something that really matters for the company, like revenue, that kind of thing. So I think just constantly testing or pushing yourself to get to how does this one thing that may seem small in the universe, how does it ultimately tie to the big stuff?
Okay. Julie, anything now?
Yeah. So taking a little bit different spin, given that I've worked a lot in field marketing, having your teams be able to articulate both what the goal is, but also get agreement with the sales leaders or the account executives that they might be working with in a given territory, that here's the program, here's what we're going to achieve, this is how we're going to measure it, and both the sales rep or sales reps and the marketer are in agreement that this is a valuable exercise, this is what defines success, and this is your role in helping it be successful as a salesperson, and here is my role as a marketer in turn to help you be successful. So I found that getting that shared measurement, shared agreement, and then there's the postmortem afterward of, hey, what went really great, or did it all fall all over the floor? But that works really well. But it's just not metrics in and of themselves,
Right.
or vanity metrics. It's, we agree that these metrics are valuable, and you point it out to the business, and then between these two groups, what defines success?
Yeah.
I'll add too that I think execution matters, especially I'm guessing most of us here at startups. I think especially at startups, just getting shit done really matters. And sometimes, and to the point Nicolas made of sometimes you're going to fail too, right? So you may not always be bringing the KPI to the table that you hoped for, that kind of thing. But sometimes execution is what matters, and being able to get stuff done is also very important. And for people to measure themselves by output, I think is really important too, in addition to the hard metrics.
Yeah, and the most, when I think about it now, the most success I had in experimenting, actually I didn't tell anybody. I was just playing on the side with a new concept, either A/B testing on landing page, something. I was just playing with something, was waiting like 1 week, 2 weeks to see result. Result doesn't mean success. Result equals I can measure something, I understand. And then I will communicate back saying, hey, I've been playing with that thing for 2 weeks. This is what I've seen. Like, what do you think? And thinking back, that's where I've been the most successful at getting my experiment to scale and grow.
That's interesting.
And you have the space to do it. You have time to do it normally, and meaning you have to carve out time to do those type of things.
Right. And understanding that program success, campaign success doesn't necessarily define your success. They're definitely related, but focus on execution, focus on the things that you can control, and ultimately, what are you learning from that experiment, right? So there's this other idea of long-term versus short-term. So marketers especially, I think, are plagued sort of similar to product folks, where you're dealing with a lot of short-term goals, but you have to be building for long-term success. How do you manage the rigor of, you've got to deliver something every week, every month, every quarter, but you're also trying to build an organization, build programs that are scalable for the next couple of years? Julie, maybe we start with you.
Sure. That's a hard one. And in a startup environment, it's even more difficult. I think back to this idea that, marketing is not an organization unto itself. It is one that is core, to the overall business. It certainly is tied to sales. It's tied to C-level. So the way that I approach it is, here is the long-term plan. But as part of that, here are the programs and the metrics and the successes, qualitative and quantitative, that you're going to see along the way. So it's that long idea, that long plan. Paint the vision for them. Where are we going to be in 6 months? Where are we going to be a year from now? And then what are the incremental things that they'll see along the way, and how this is moving the company or a business unit or a team forward. My experience, and it's one's and girls' experience, is that if you're showing people the steps along the way of, this is what I said I was going to do, this is what I did, or the team did, or we collectively did, and this is helping you or us get to this long-term plan, to this long-term goal, really, really helps. What an executive doesn't want to hear is, here's all the tactics I did, and here's all the greatness, but it's, what was that long-term plan and the steps along the way. And I find it works well. It also gives you air cover when there is failure, when something doesn't work, when people didn't show up to your event, when your campaign was a complete bust. But if they see the long-term plan, then there can be forgiveness and perhaps cooperation along the way to make it better.
Yeah, you have so 2 tips. The first one is, don't say yes to everything. You're in a startup. Every hour, I'm sure somebody comes to your desk and has a new idea or concept, whatever they want to launch. So you're like, the difference between saying yes and no is yes next month or yes in 2 weeks. And you will discover that people actually are like, okay, fine, we'll do it in 2 weeks. And it works. It does work. The second one is, have your list of things you're not going to do. So I'm being pretty religious when we plan internally about like, what are the 3 things you are solving for the quarters, and what are the 3 things you're not going to do. And I'm pushing really hard sometimes to write them down. Like, please tell me what you're not going to do. And by trying to have that balance of like pushing back a couple of things, saying like not everything needs to be done in the afternoon or the day after, having that list, which seems pretty basic, but after it's up to you to manage it, is a way to get started. For people managing teams, is for them to move from manager to leaders, is they need to start to be able to spend more time thinking about the next quarter or the next quarter than they are executing and running the current quarter, right? If you see that you're spending 100% of your time just thinking about what's going to happen in Q4, if I may, it's going to be tough. What I'm going to say, you're going to get nowhere as a leader. You're not going to move because you're just going to focus what's going to happen up to Christmas. You need to have that percentage of time thinking about Q1. Now we're in Q4, so thinking about Q1. And the more that percentage is going to increase, the more you're going to be able to move to that like leadership role or thinking about the future. And to get there, the last piece is you need to have a great team. It's all about talent. As you said it before, like it is priority number 1. I've been at LinkedIn for 5 years. Like talent is number 1. If we need to hire and wait 6 months to hire somebody, we'll wait 6 months, we'll wait 9 months, but there is no way we hire a low performer. And it starts with your team.
I'll just maybe piggyback on their answers and add a couple things to the idea of kind of managing your requests and saying no and that sort of thing. Use a Trello board. Shameless plug.
It was a plug for you. It was a plug for you.
Shameless plug. I'll give you the money after.
Thank you.
I did mention bribes, right? That's how it works. But whether you use a Trello board or something else, I actually think it is important, and I've definitely learned this myself, that it is important to have that place, that sort of visual representation of all the requests that you have. So when somebody is coming to you with a question, you're saying no, they can actually see the pile of stuff that you are working on, or you can put it, like you said, in the 2-week bucket or the 4-week bucket, and they can see that, wow, I'm not the only person making a request, right? It sometimes helps for them to get the full context, and I think that can help you say yes and no. And then to a lot of Julie's points, I mean, I totally agree with all that, and I think one thing I try to do is lay out for my team a 12-month strategy and framework, and in that framework we have sort of 5 pillars or buckets of stuff that we're going to do to advance our long-term cause. And anytime anybody's doing a short-term task or tactic, I want to know, and we're very explicit about what part of that foundation or which company KPI, however you want to structure it, what is that tactic tied to? Which cause is that helping us advance? And I think just giving people some sort of framework to think about their job and the things they do and tie it back to that, I think can go a long way.
That makes a ton of sense. I know for myself, not saying no has really kicked me in the ass several times. So say no as often as you possibly can. The opposite of saying no is, there's always that time in your career where you feel like you're ready for the next step and you want to take on more. And there might be a sense of, well, I'm actually part of a larger team where we're all working hand in hand. How does someone advocate for themselves to take the next step or take on a larger chunk of responsibility, which may or may not include budget, without, feeling like they're alienating their team or taking something from someone else? And is it something you've had to deal with yourself?
That's interesting. I think first and foremost, you got to ask, right? Like I think it's extremely rare that just based on the work you're doing and the great job you're doing, that somebody's going to come hand you the next rung of your career, ladder. And I think that's absolutely something I've learned and had to do everywhere along the way, is you got to go get it. Like, you got to go ask for it, and you have to not be afraid to put yourself out there and go for that sort of thing. At the same time, and this may sound slightly contradictory, when I'm looking at future leaders or people who might be in line to move up and that sort of thing, in some ways I want the opposite there. What I want to see there is people who are executing, are ruthless about execution, but do it by living in the land of us's and we's instead of I's and me's, right? The person who, when they're talking about the success, when they're talking about the things they're executing, they're thinking from a team based, and they're using words like, we did this, we accomplished this. So it's like, you have to be the person that can go ask for stuff and can set your career goals and be very explicit with your boss of where you're trying to get to. But then in day-to-day execution, I want to see the team-focused person and a person who's not just championing their own cause.
Makes sense. Nicolas?
And if you, another thing is, you have to be clear with yourself about what you want to do next.
Yeah.
And you should discuss it with your boss. And have not a discussion like once a year. Like, it could be once every 3 months, whatever, 6 months, saying, okay, like, I'm going to do that job for another year or 6 months, whatever you feel like. Don't go too fast either. Sometimes people that are pretty young feel that they master everything after 6 months. I'm old now, so I can say this. And it's wrong. Like, go deep, like, learn as much as you can. But when you're done learning, and if you want to move on, is having those discussion about what you want to do next. And the older you get, if I may, is what you want to do next. It's not about your next move, it's about what you want to do after. And you need to have this type of master plan and discuss it with your boss. And sometimes an opportunity will come within the company, sometimes it won't. It's okay. Like, there are plenty of jobs, so it's good to have those type of discussion. And I'm having those type of discussion with my team. And if unfortunately I'm not able to provide that job that they're looking for because I don't have an open rec at that time, I don't have the availability, I will help that person to find another job. I have to say, because it's all at the end, it's all about happiness. We spend more time at work than we spend at home. You want to be happy. You don't want to be frustrated. It sounds naive, but it's really important.
For my team, and in fact, we just had an example of this, was stretch assignments. So what I try to do is provide stretch assignments, projects that somebody can take on that's a little bit beyond their remit, to give them experience. So in the case of one individual on the team, he looks after one region, and we were in the midst of backfilling a role for another region, and he stepped in for 6 weeks and went to that region and worked on plans and worked on a specific country launch. And it helped us be immensely successful with the launch itself, and also gave him experience with other leaders in other regions and also sharing some great best practices from the region that he covers. So that's another way to do this, where there may not be a job that's available, but there's certainly more than enough work that's out there. And how can you carve out something to give that person who is willing to raise their hand, to give them a little bit more experience, and then when that role does come up, or that opportunity does come up, you have some examples from which to draw to say, oh, so-and-so may be right for that role. Why don't I have a talk with that person?
Yeah, funny. At Trello, we're actually doing these like management workshops for anyone that's a manager in the company. And we actually just had one this morning that was all about one-on-ones, and their best practice, going back to something Nicolas said, but their best practice they recommended us today was that 20 to 30% of every one-on-one should be focused on career development or future growth, that sort of thing. So again, be very explicit both ways, either drawing that from your employee or making sure you're telling your boss, and make that a regular conversation.
Mm. And one more for people managing team, sometimes they forget that they need to have a successor. So they come and they're like, I want a bigger job. And so they keep it for them, and then they start chatting, and you're like, yeah, but actually we have an issue here. Is the way you built your team is you don't have a successor to replace you. And you could think it's like, bad idea. It's my boss issue. No, it's not. It's your issue. It means actually as a manager, you've done a poor job building your team. So as a way to assess people who want to grow in their job and are managing, like if they don't have succession plan or they don't have a couple of people line up to take their job, from my perspective, it means they're not ready for the next one because they haven't done a good job hiring, nurturing, and developing people on their team. It seems harsh, but it's really important from my perspective.
Yep.
That makes a ton of sense. I know. I'll share one quick anecdote. I had a woman who was fairly early in her career, had just started working for me. She set up a one-on-one, and she had a matrix that was the 2x2, and it was feedback. And she said how she really thrives and learns is by getting feedback often. So she set out a schedule and said, this is how I really prefer to receive feedback. And I was like, this is amazing. I have 8 other direct reports. It would be amazing if they all told me how they wanted feedback and to be managed. And through those conversations, she was getting feedback from me, both positive and constructive, but also had the opportunity to have these dialogues that maybe otherwise you wouldn't be comfortable asking because the opportunity is not natural or organic. So also create those ways to have those conversations with your mentor, and really what I like this concept of manage your career. It is your career, it's not your manager's career, it's your career. Right?
Yeah, actually, I love you hearing that. It totally spurred in my mind. I had an employee not that long ago that this was really impressive to me, like completely initiate on their own a 360-degree review of themselves. Like that was not something our company was doing at the time. It wasn't any sort of formal process. It wasn't anything I asked them for or told them to do. They just completely on their own went out and asked people, kind of put together, I don't know, found a template online or whatever, and got it in front of a bunch of peers and other managers in the company and executed a review on themselves. I thought that was awesome.
Yeah, be open to the feedback, right?
Yeah.
So the point you brought up about the successor actually takes us to our final question. What do you look for in your successor or the future leaders that you're helping groom?
Why do I? That's a tough one. Why do I look for? So first, I look for one. I want somebody to take my job. I want to have somebody on the team, and I want to nurture my leads for one to kick my ass a little bit and challenge me and take my job. So that's important. Not every leader or manager is looking for a successor.
Sure.
Many people are just like, it's my job. Nobody can do it when I leave. That's bad. What I look is, it's a tough one. It's a capacity to inspire the team. I believe leadership is about gratefulness. It's all about giving back. And so the capacity to inspire, lead, and develop the team is the most important. And hopefully they have the skill set to do it, to do their work day to day. But it's all about managing talent.
I think for any marketer, and certainly those that are on a leadership team or even individual contributors, it's really understanding where the business is going. So it's not, quarter to quarter, but are you in touch with where we think the business is going a few years from now? And then thinking about the skill sets, the experiences, the personality necessary to make that happen. And you can then, across your own leadership team or elsewhere in the organization, start to find those people that may make sense for the role, or realize that perhaps the talent doesn't exist within the 4 walls, and begin to craft out what is the profile of the individual necessary to step into your role. So the company is going to be, $1 billion in 2020, and it's going to be selling into these new markets and, and selling into new audiences. Do the people that we have today really understand how to do that? Or perhaps they don't. And we either need to train people or we need to look for people that can do that. But really assessing where the business is going and then thinking about the profile of individual or the grooming and education and mentorship that's going to be required to identify those people within the organization to step into your role.
I'll give you 3. That's because I was going to give you 4, but she just gave you them.
I stole it.
So, one I already said before, to me, it's I look at for people who are execution machines, but do that from a team-oriented mindset. Again, back to the we's instead of the me's. Second would be, and it's similar to what Nicolas said, but I think just how do people respond to this person? And are they able to drive people to do things while also being empathetic towards people, whether that's your customers or your fellow employees, that they have an understanding and ability to listen to people and then ultimately get those people to do things is definitely something I look for. And then third, I would say, is grit. That's an adjective I really like, but that resolve, just that ability that no matter if things are going well or things are going really bad, is this a person who stays with the ship, right? Do they keep pressing on? Do they keep pushing? Or are they the kind, like when things go bad, they just become they're down in the dumps, or they become the gossip monger internally, or those sorts of things. So somebody that has that kind of steely resolve to really battle through problems, that's to me what a leader looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you all. We're going to jump to the audience and take some questions.
Easy one.
The hard-hitting ones, I was going to say.
Well, I'll go. There's 2 answers. Number 1, working with a mentor is good. It's good practice. Working, with a senior female leader within the organization or even external, I think is good practice. I would say the other thing, quite frankly, is getting in the mix with the men. This past 2 quarters, I've had the opportunity of being on a leadership team with all male sales leaders. And as a marketer, it's a little frightening. There's a whole language that exists between sales leaders versus that of marketers, but putting yourself in those uncomfortable situations and learning how to communicate in a different way, but getting your point across is important, and to build those bonds. So those would be 2 things. First, seeking out a female mentor, and the second thing, really do work with male leaders within the organization and start to feel comfortable having those conversations and building those relationships. It really helps.
I would just add, even to almost like combine those in a way, like I would highly recommend getting a mentor that's a female, but also getting a mentor that's a male.
No, absolutely.
Like I think it's really important to have both sides of that equation, so that you can really understand the differences, you can bounce things off, and I've definitely seen that work well for people.
Yep.
I think the key thing there is transparency and communication are like the 2 generic cliche words, but I really think it ultimately comes down to those things. It should never be a surprise to anybody when something like that has to happen, when an underperformer has to be dealt with or removed from the situation. I think you've got to hold people accountable, and you've got to be transparent and open about that, and set very specific milestones and goals, and hold people to those. And I think once you're in a situation where there maybe has been some underperformance already, I think setting near-term things, short things, and that are, that they can get done, I think is important. So you're not dragging this thing out. You're not waiting 3 months to figure out if this person's actually going to hack it. I think at that time you've got to bring stuff to be very closer, kind of near-term things that you can execute on. I think you want to give the person a ton of support as well when you have somebody who's not performing there. I think you want to obviously go back to listening and be empathetic. You want to understand what's happening and try to do your best to understand, is this something systemic, or is this something the person's going through a bad patch, right? And how do we get through that? But yeah, really I think it comes down to just being very transparent, open in your one-on-ones, your communication, telling somebody where they stand all the way through, so that it's not going to be a surprise.
Yeah, it should not be a surprise. I fully agree. Like, should never be like, oh, you're underperforming and it has been for 9 months and I haven't told you. biggest mistake ever. So that's one. Number two is remember that you hire that person, or you've been managing that person, which means you share the responsibility on their performance. Okay. The worst is once I had a manager saying, "Oh, my team sucks," and I'm like, "Yeah, actually, you're managing
You
it."
hired your team.
So just remember this. Like, it means there might be an issue of a team you've been leading, but it's like, long story short, it's your team, so it might be somewhere else. So never forget about this. The third one is the mistake that everybody does is you keep people and he's going to improve and he's going to and everybody does it and I would still do it, and giving the second chance of okay, it doesn't work, more or less, as when you have when you don't trust somebody. Told me one of my mentors, when you don't trust a person anymore is the time to let go and not to give that second, third chance of like keeping people there. And helping actually, and I had I had a few of those discussions saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna stop now, like it's not gonna work. The person was upset like hell, but I tried to explain to them as much as I can what was going on. And most of them going through that transition found a new job where they were happy again, because actually you could see that when you do not perform, you're not happy. It impacts you at work, it impacts your colleague, and it impacts your personal life. I know, again, it sounds a little bit naive, but that's what it is about. And be prep will be my last one. Like, people go to those 101 and they haven't prepped anything for the discussion, and be super prep on the why, like explaining everything. Like, don't come and improvise on the why of the low performance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just say be very clear on your expectations and communicate your expectations. And also be very clear that if you don't believe the individual will ever meet your expectations. Sometimes that person just won't, and there's a variety of reasons why that'll happen, but radical candor is pretty important. And then everybody knows where they stand, and it gives an opportunity, I think, for you as a leader to crystallize in your own mind what your expectations are for that role and for that individual, and what you believe excellence is and is necessary to be successful, and also crystallizes in the mind of the individual as to what the bar is. And if it can't be met, it can't be met. And then there's an opportunity for somebody to move into a new role that maybe is better suited for where they want to go, or maybe the level that they're in.
And
But at the end of the day, you own it.
And it's never great, and it's never an easy conversation
No.
for anybody.
It's
I would
crappy.
say nobody comes
Yeah,
and
it's
goes,
totally
I'm going to
crappy.
fire somebody. It's like
No, it's not good.
nobody, like people like this are bad people again. Like, it's never easy for anybody to go and to have those conversations.
Yeah.
But it's so important, and I'm glad you asked it too, because it is one of the toughest things about being in management. But it's so important, and it's important to your team overall. There's nothing worse to overall team's performance and happiness than having an underperformer on the team. And frankly too, even as emotional and hard as they are, and they can be, I would say, in the vast majority, if not all, of the situations where I've had to fire somebody, it's worked out better for them and us. Like, it generally, as to your point, they're not happy they're not performing for a reason, right? And if you can ultimately help them solve that reason, which might mean showing them the door, to put it harshly, but generally ends up working out. And I think generally people, I've seen at least, generally land on their feet and end up in a better place.
Yep.
Somebody smarter than you is the first part. Yeah, you got to aim high, and I think especially as a new or early manager, that's probably the hardest thing, because like you're intimidated by that, right? Like, I don't want them showing me up, right? But I think the great managers and ultimately to build out a team that's going to make you and the company successful, you got to aim really high, set the bar higher than yourself.
Yeah, I would agree. Somebody who's better at you or better you in a given area. I think the second thing is somebody who can put together a cogent plan and be able to defend the plan, because that is also somebody that probably is going to be a future leader who can guide a team in developing a strategy, a plan, and measurement, versus somebody that's just going to rapid fire tactic.
Yeah. So on top of being able to do the job and everything is the two things I'm looking at when I interview with people is, one, if they are a culture fit. I've made too many mistakes of hiring people based on their skill set. Like, he's going to nail it.
Totally.
And it was not
Yeah,
a culture
totally.
fit. I've done it a couple of times. Big mistake. I will not do it again. And even if the guy is a genius in his space, or like, it's okay. And unfortunately, it's not going to work, because that's horrible. And the second one is passion for their job. It's a big deal, because the job you're doing today is not the job you're going to do tomorrow. Like the industry is changing pretty fast, and you're going to have to reinvent yourself every 6 months. And that passion will drive that transformation that you need. And especially when you are in startups and growing, and the person you're going to hire tomorrow will become either a manager or will change job like 2 or 3 times within the next 2 years. If they don't have that passion, they will not go through that transformation. They will fail.
Yep.
So passion, culture fit.
Those are the exact words I use too, and that's like 80% of what I interview for is those exact 2 things. The only other thing I'd add too is if you're the individual person, you're the only one, that means at this stage most likely you need generalists. Like you need the 5-tool athletes that can do a little bit of everything. As your second marketing hire, you don't go too specialized.
Yeah.
Never happened. No, so one thing, I go back to the superpower we have. I do believe that we have superpower and we can do some really cool thing. And I spend a lot of time inviting people, not from marketing, from other part of the organization, to attend my monthly or to attend my meetings. Or I will invite myself actually and go to their meetings with one goal, is just to explain what I do and to educate them. And short term, it's not going to pay off. They're like, hey, okay, that's interesting, whatever. But long term, and especially if you think about people like finance, like sales, you need to build that connective tissue with them for them to understand what you do, what's your value, and what you bring to the organization. That within like 3 to 6, don't expect. It's like nurturing. Everybody does nurturing. Customer are not going to buy after the first email. So just building that relationship and being able to build it over time, where within like 3 to 6 months, people care if they have to care, and know what you do. It goes back to the thing I mentioned before: is who are the 5 people for you to be successful in the organization, and where are the 5 people for your team to be successful, and what type of meetings do you have? What type of discussion do you have to drive that agenda? I think marketers in general do a poor job, and I'm part of it, of marketing themselves within the organization. And really, you need to have your own communication plan.
I would just, all of those things that you just said are very true. I think the other thing is also finding an advocate that's outside of marketing who can advocate on your behalf. Somebody that is maybe viewed as a neutral party, or somebody that maybe that individual, believes is, as a strong sense of what needs to be done for the business, and can speak in a language that perhaps is a little bit more relevant to them. Sometimes there's I don't understand what those marketing people are talking about. Their buttons, bows, bells, and whistles. I don't get it. But sometimes if you bring in somebody that is from their department or from their organization, the translation helps. So it's just an idea.
I like it.
Not much more to add. I agree. We're agreeing so much. I was hoping to come here and fight a little bit, but no. I think it is. It's relationships. I think the advocate idea is a great one. I guess the other thing I could say is hit it head on. Right. I'm definitely the open book, transparent kind of guy. I would ever go to that person and have that discussion. Right. Hey, you're only popping up when there's issues, and confront it. Right. Yeah. I think sometimes you can get some good results out of just that.
Yep.
And if there are salespeople, as marketer, we tend to be too nice.
Yeah.
We
don't
are
be nice.
We apologize a lot.
Yeah, don't apologize.
Yeah.
You don't imagine the power you have. You have the budget. And I'm having multiple discussion with sales saying, okay, you don't care about those MQL or that MQL stream going to region ABC. It's fine. I'm switching it off. I'm moving. And like, whoa, what did you say? And then this is the type of discussion you want to have with sales. If there are salespeople, it's not like, I'm going to help you. It doesn't work. Okay, it's like you give, you get. That's the way it works.
Threats and intimidation.
No, but it works.
Yeah,
it's like that's the way.
Yeah.
That's the way it works. And then you will see when you start cutting or just reinvesting in other part of your plan, people suddenly wake up, come to your desk, and say, "Hold on, let's have a meeting and discuss."
So true.
There you go.
Well, everyone, thank you panelists for a wonderful discussion. Let's give them a round of applause.